As we study the book of Revelation now, we pray for the eyes of faith to see things that are unseen. For we have heard here that the things that we can see and touch, important as they are things that are temporary and passing. But the untouchable, the unseen things are eternal. By your Spirit, help us to connect with those things in these few moments. For Jesus' sake and his glory, that we might know him, the resurrected one. Amen. Revelation chapter 21. Let's read that together. And I'm just reading from the NIV. And we will read from verses 1 to verse 4. From 1 to 4, we'll do 1 to 4 today, and then we will do 5 to 8 tomorrow, or next week. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the peoples, and he will dwell with them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." They say that repetition is the soul of education. Let me repeat that. Repetition is the soul of education. So these last two visions are part, remember, of our ninefold vision, which I compared to a cathedral. So let's go back into that cathedral that I explained some of the structure of the book of Revelation. Cathedral has the nave where you enter into it, and then the apse, which is the place near where the altar is. It's the place there in the distance when you come in the door. That's the focal point of the seating, of everything. All the features of the cathedral is focused at the end point, where there's a semicircle area called the apse around there. And I've said that we've gone through the book of Revelation, and you come, when you sort of in the middle area heading towards the apse, you come to these seven steps of these seven visions, and they take you up. When you come to the 8th and 9th, you have arrived in the focal point of this cathedral, the real center of everything. And Revelation chapter 8 and 9 give us these last two visions of the arrival, of the destination that we've been traveling through in the book of Revelation. So that's where we are, and we are now standing in the center point. And it doesn't go any further. The book we will see the bride city that we will look at from 2 weeks' time. We'll begin with the bride city, but the bride city, the city is just going to be unpacking more of what we're looking at today. It's not telling us anything new. So I've just kept a few notes so that I can keep things of focus. We're going to have a look at the city. So John sees here, he's seen these 8 visions, and now he sees the holy city, the new Jerusalem, as you can see there, coming down from heaven as a bride prepared. 8 of the previous visions, which all begin with the word I saw, I saw, I saw, I saw. 8 times he described these visions I saw, but in the final vision, he doesn't first give the verb I saw, he gives the noun. So he's saying I saw, I saw, I saw. On the last one, John starts off by saying you can't see it in the English, but in the Greek, the last vision starts like this. the holy city, the new Jerusalem, I saw. And John breaks off the normal grammatical sequence that he had introduced his visions in the 8 previous visions. And this is interesting. Why does John suddenly put out the noun there, the object that he sees? He doesn't first say, I saw. And in the notes, if any of you have read that, it's a bit like, well, this is the time when the bride arrives. Now, I've in the past conducted a few weddings, and I've been to quite a few, and I've attended one, my own. And but what's very, very clear, the service really begins, of course, when the bride enters the doors, and everything is as preparation and chatting and conversation, etc. But as presiding minister, you sort of see the bride, and then you know everything must be quiet now because the bride is going to be entering. That's the moment, finally. It's a bit like John suddenly sees sort of the bride's arrived, that announcement, she's here. And there's not a lot of sort of comment and etc. after that. And that's why this dramatic announcement, he puts forward, the bride has arrived. And I think that's why there's a little bit of a difference in grammar as he introduces this. Because as we're going to see, this descending city is actually presented as a form of a bride. Now, there is a city that comes down. Let's think now about a city, because this is how it's introduced. What does he see? He sees a city descending from heaven, a city. And we need to spend a little bit of time thinking about the importance of cities, because the city is now going to take center stage for the rest of the Bible. Of course, it's only 2 chapters, the rest of the Bible. But yes, from chapter 21, from 21 verse 2 through to the end, except for the few verses of the epilogue, the main spotlight is going to be upon the city. So we need to think of cities and think of what a city meant. And so I'm going to draw your attention to the importance of cities. So before you have in your question about, all right, which city is this talking about? We're going to think a little bit about the fact of cities, which is hard for us people here in Royal, St. Pringle Bay, Betty's Bay. That's why we've left the cities. Because we don't want to live in cities any longer. We want to live here more closer to nature and by the sea, etc. But we've all been brought up in cities, and so the things that I'm going to be talking about we can relate to. But I'm going to be telling you some things which are quite different to our understanding of cities from what cities were in the Old Testament and even in the ancient Near East. We know that the era of John's era is an era of great cities. Jerusalem, Antioch, Constantinople, Ephesus, these great cities. Rome, of course, was the great city of the day. And so cities were very, very important. And for John, as he sees the city, I can imagine that it was actually a vision of a city for him was very heartwarming and encouraging. Because where was John when he saw this vision of the city? He was in exile. He was not in a city. He was on his own somewhere. And here's this great dwelling place, this city. And so it meant a lot for John when he was in exile to see this as the city of God, and how he's on the island of Patmos, and somebody who's a pilgrim who will enter and come into the city. So I'm going to give you 4 things about the city which are just facts about cities. Firstly, and very basically, the first 2 we can relate the most to. The last 2 would be rather different for us, although we'll understand it. Cities are places of organized human society. Organized human society. That's what a city really was in those days, and to maybe a lesser degree, we might question the organized, but they're organized places of human society. It's human society on an organized level, and of course physically enclosed. You can also put that if you're taking notes. It's quite a long sentence. Organized human society in a physically enclosed environment. That's what a city was in those particular days. It was places, of course, of compact communal life where people all lived together, and they got together for various reasons. Cities were a bit different from the villages and from tribal existence, because in cities you all sort of mixed together. In agrarian, tribal, or more hunting-gathering communities, you weren't compacted in an organized society. But cities meant that people had to relate to one another beyond their kinship ties, beyond family ties. It meant that you were having to get on with all sorts of people in cities, not just your nuclear families or your tribal families. This is what cities did. They provided places for people to live together in an organized manner, and a whole lot of different people living together in community. There were also, of course, private facilities in the cities and public facilities in cities, but everything that went into a social, an organized community. It's an organized reality where you can't just do your own thing in cities. You might be able to get away with it in villages, but in cities it's organized living where there is politics. Now, when I say the word politics, of course it can be used very negatively, but politics was generally the word used for the organized life in cities. It requires politics. It's from the word polis, which is a Greek word for city. So politics is life in the city, how to live in the city. And so every city had politics. Let's use the word in a healthy sense. It's the rules and regulations by which everybody's got to live together. It can be good and can be bad, but it's just the simple things within those cities. So that's the first thing. And so this is going to be important, because if John is going to be seeing a reality which is going to help us understand the eternal state. These visions help us understand, as I said, it's the glasses by which, or the binoculars. These two last visions are the binoculars by which we see as far as possible into eternity. And one of them, of course, is a city. And so this means eternity is also going to be an organized human society. It's not just going to be, I'll sit there on my own in my little room. And Jesus said, my Father's house, I will just be on my own. Christians are not always easy people to get on with, and to think of eternity with some Christians is rather taxing. So I'll maybe have my own little house or whatever. No, the picture is organized. We're going to be, heaven or eternity is a part of an organized society. And there's a good order of everybody living together and working together, because this is what a city means, you see. This is what a city means to the people. And this is the good politics of heaven. Secondly, and these are related, I tried to extract, as I did some reading a while ago about cities, these are the 4 things that are extracted. The second thing is that cities were very much places of human flourishing. Places of human flourishing. This is why people came to the cities, emigrated to the cities, back then and still now, although things are changing. But people went to cities because that's where they could find what they needed to live and to survive and to prosper and to flourish. It was the promise of human flourishing. And that's why all cities, which had to have, and it was defined city, you had to have good security. You have to have walls, don't you? What's a city without walls in the Bible? No, they all had to have walls, because security was almost the number one thing, wasn't it? You can't really have a city without walls. That would be maybe a village. What made a city was generally the walls, because it was a place of human flourishing and a place where people, one of the things is we need to be protected. Protected from other people, protected from nature, the elements or predators, wild animals, etc. And it's a place where we gather together, and one of the things for protection. So walls and security. But cities were all, of course, with human flourishing. The other thing that you need is provision. And this is why in the provision, cities were places that had to be near water. You couldn't flourish. We can't flourish without water. This is the basic fact of our existence. It's a way that God should remind us of our mortality, isn't it? If you just don't drink water, you won't be able to do anything. It's how dependent you are. We need water, so cities had to be built on rivers or near wells, points. Jerusalem, of course, had the spring of Gihon and other places. And when the spring of Gihon, I think in Hezekiah's time, was built inside the city walls, you can still go to Hezekiah's aqueduct and the wall that he cut through to the rock to get to the spring. It made you, and you had good security, good water provision. You were almost set. That's all that you needed. And of course, also with human flourishing we can include trade and wealth within cities and business. You could buy and sell things. The whole aspect of economics and wealth and trade happened in cities as well. You can buy and sell on your markets, your agora, as they were called in the Greek cities. It was a place generally where money was the means of accomplishing that human flourishing. All perfectly understandable things for us. Of course, the one thing which maybe the cities in John's day, the big Greek cities, the Greek Alexander the Great and the Greeks, the Greeks made a lot of cities and a lot of human flourishing in cities. And when Alexander the Great conquered the Asia and Turkey and some of northern Egypt, and he conquered them and he established these Greek cities. Remember, in Greek cities they often had libraries, gymnasiums, things of that nature, theaters in cities. These are very important to the Greeks. Human flourishing was part of involved human culture to the Greeks. And so education, looking after your body, art, drama, entertainment, athletics, they were all introduced by the Greeks. The Romans were more into just conquering and law and order and ruling, etc. We'll come to that. But the Greeks, they had mastered human flourishing in its culture. And so to be part of those cities was to be part where there's human flourishing and to be part of a commonwealth. And the sense of a commonwealth of a city was a wonderful thing to the people. If a city was going well and you lived there, your life would flourish in the commonwealth of the city. It's a nice word. What's the word? What's in Afrikaans? Commonwealth. See, as an Englishman, I'm longing to get a word that you haven't got a better word for. Often Afrikaans is a better word, or is commonwealth. A commonwealth. But I like that word, a commonwealth. It speaks a lot about what cities were. Speaks of what being a Christian is, being part of the commonwealth of the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ, of His people.
Gemeenebes.
Gemeenebes.
Commonwealth of Nations.
Okay, no, it's far inferior. Hebrew has the lovely word, of course, shalom. Hebrew has the lovely word of shalom, and shalom is human flourishing. It is a rich word of human flourishing, not just peace, absence of warfare. That's just part of it, but you need human flourishing. And maybe the Greek word eirene, where we get the word Irene from. Irene. Eirene is also related to a holistic sense of peace. So that's the second point. The cities were there. All right. That must come back on again. Could I just have a little bit of water? Thanks. Now the next two are going to be a little bit different in terms of the cities. The Commonwealth. Thank you. The next two are, as I said, going to be a little bit different in terms of what people of those days understood. So what I'm trying to do here is to remind you to try and think what would the original readers think about when they looked at or they understood a city. This is very important for us as we seek to know the next chapter or two. The second was cities were places of worship. Or the third one, sorry. The third one is that cities were places of worship. And in cities of the ancient day, it was normally filled with temples. I think somebody... have you got a mask on? Somebody's been coughing. Do you know you could get COVID on the internet? I don't know. No, you must start. Thank you, somebody. If you had just been coughing, I think you've got your unmute on. If you could just mute yourself. No problem. Just that everybody doesn't catch the cough. So thirdly, cities are places of worship, as I said, of temples. And there were many temples. Often it was very important in that culture that there was a founding God. Who's the God of your city, or who founded your cities? Everything was very religious for those days. And part of their worship of their gods. Of course, in Roman culture, wasn't it Romulus and Remus? Whether they were gods, I'm not quite sure. Maybe they were deified later. I'm sure, but Romulus and Remus, remember, were related to the founding of the city of Rome. And in many of these cultures, they go back to some sort of divine origins. Why at this place? And that was because then they wanted to worship the God for the human flourishing. It was very important that human flourishing came from God. And they found God. And so there were temples, places of worship. With that, the important people in cities in those days, the very important people were the priests. Because those priests were the brokers between the God and the city. And they were obviously the people who mediated the sacrifices and the offerings, and they brought the blessing of the gods to the city. That's what you really wanted in the city. Your city, being a place of worship, was really a sacred space. It was something which was not just secular, but it was sacred. And this is where probably there's a big disconnect between our understanding of city and their understanding of city. It was physical, but it was more a sacred place for a lot of citizens because of their gods, who they had their idols or some sort of worship within those cities. And so it was very, very important for the shalom to have priests and to have a God in that city. The last thing about cities in the ancient Near East is that they were places of governance. Cities were places of governance. and you would normally have some sort of thrones, whether the great throne of a king, if it was a city of the great king, if it was a capital city. It would be the capital city because that's where the monarch, or that's where somebody of the highest rank would have his palace, being able to issue his decrees. But within your city there would be some place of governance that would represent the highest authority of the day in your particular city. And from this throne, from this rule, the important thing in cities was justice or righteousness that was to be issued from that place of governance. That's what they wanted, and that's why it was there, for justice and for governance. We would call it law and order. And cities were places where the authorities were for establishing law and order. This is a very important word in the Bible, righteousness. If you come across that, you might have come across that quite often in the Old Testament a lot. Righteousness, mishpat, is righteousness. And righteousness is putting things right, making things right. So in other words, when those of you who are here in our house, when you leave, my wife brings about righteousness. She puts the seats back in order, puts the chair there, and whatever, how things were, putting things as they were. Of course, the illustration of this is wrong now, but that's what righteousness was. It had that sense of order, of how society should be to flourish well. It wasn't just sort of laws and judgment and sentence. It was a positive force to bring about order in society and to restore things to how they should be. And when there's imbalance, then things have got to be balanced again. So cities were places of governance to bring about righteousness. And so when we see the city here, this is what it's going to entail. It's going to entail all of these things. It's going to entail, this is a place of where God is going to be governing the universe. So in this city will be the place of God's authority, which will go out into all the world. Is John seeing the place of God's governance? And ruling and reigning with Christ is going to be picked up at the end of the book of Revelation. It's going to be, of course, a place of worship. The city is going to be a place that the God or our God will dwell with us, and we will dwell with God. It's going to have that aspect of worship. And of course, it's going to be the ultimate place of human flourishing, this city, because it's coming from God. And it's going to be the place where His people will live in an ordered human society, in the perfect human society. So those are just some things that are not necessarily in our mind when we see the city. But there were things very much in the mind of John, and I think in God's mind, as truths that he was revealing about the city. John sees the city, you see there with this adjective called holy. He saw the holy city. And in my translation of this, I didn't put a capital H, I just put a small h, holy city, because the city is the main thing. This is just telling us about, it's a holy city. Yes, it is the holy city, but it's a holy city. Now, people such as Isaiah the prophet needed to be reminded of that. Because if you've ever read Isaiah the prophet, I don't think Isaiah liked cities. Although in his prophecy he did speak about the New Jerusalem. But Isaiah the prophet, when he pictures the coming kingdom, it's of broad rivers and renewed nature. He loves the creation imagery. The imagery of the new city in Isaiah is there, but it's not as dominant. And part of the reason was because Isaiah the prophet was of aristocratic class. He lived in the cities and he saw all the corruption that went with cities, all the degradation, all the dirt and the filth that went in cities. And we understand there is a dark side to the city, and sometimes the dark side is stronger to the light side. That's why people say you can go to places like Seychelles, or even in any place really, in Africa or around the world. You, as a tourist, you go to this wonderful destination venue and you leave, and somebody says, well, let me tell you really what the Seychelles is about. You've just seen 2%. Have you seen the 98% of poverty and squalor and the common life of people that are out there? It's very easy to get a propaganda perspective on things. And so cities do have a dark side. And of course, in the Greek cities, if you think of sexual immorality, of brothels, I mean, they didn't bat an eye at that. That's just what they were in cities. It's just common. In these cities, there was places that were, human life doesn't seem to be functioning well. It's not flourishing. And of course, when justice is perverted, or there's bribery, or there's corruption in the governance, and when the priests are also corrupt, or when they're worshipping the wrong God, it's going to deconstruct and fall apart as a city. So this is important, that God is not here showing that because of the history of city, remember the first city builder in the Bible, do you know his name? He was the first person to build a city, who left Eden. Cain went out and he built a city. He called it Enoch after his son. And there's a storyline of cities in the Bible that go to Babylon and Nineveh and all these places. And they're generally in the Bible, cities are seen negatively because they're centers of when humans get together, and most of the humans are corrupt. We all are, except by the grace of God. And so they become centers of injustice and false worship and idolatry. A lot of these cities worshipping idols. So what does God do after Eden? He doesn't throw cities away. We would expect maybe there's not going to be a city. There'll just be a new creation. No, there's not just a new creation. There's also a city. There's not just Eden. You see, the new creation is what Eden would have been like, just Eden. But there is a city. God is showing in the city, and I mention this because it is important for us to know that He's sanctifying the city. That's why it's called holy. Holy is an adjective which means to make sanctified, or to make it godly, or to set it apart for God's use, to sanctify. Didn't throw away cities. He sanctified. He took up the city and He sanctified her. It's as though God takes that prostitute, which was the city of Rome. Imagine if, it's not in Revelation, but we could imagine, takes that prostitute and He sanctifies her and turns her into a bride. That's really what God is doing in sanctification and with people. That's what He wants to do with us, with you and me, if we will give ourselves to Him, if we will say we're sorry, if we'll come clean to God and to Christ and give up our own selfish way. If we come to the Lord, what does He do with us when we come to Him sincerely? Well, He sanctifies us. That means all the bad stuff from the sin in you goes out, and all the good stuff that He made you stays in and gets better. He doesn't throw us away, He sanctifies it. And some well-known Catholic writer, Baron van Hugel, who was a spiritual writer, he was quoted as saying that sanctification is the biggest thing that God does. It's the biggest thing. That He takes something and He makes it holy, and He cleanses it and restores it and sanctifies it and sets it apart for Himself, and away from the pollution of sin. So this image of the holy city is going to be telling us that. And it's an important reminder of how God works as He sanctifies. Let me say something about this new Jerusalem. And he says he saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from heaven. And by the way, it's coming down from heaven. Before I tell you about the New Jerusalem, let's just think about that. The thing in the book of Revelation is that everything has a significance in some way. So let's think about this holy city, the New Jerusalem, its descent. It's coming down from heaven. Now this is important. And this is why we mustn't become scientific literalists with this book and try to tell us, this is telling us we must look up to the heavens because this is the direction which this thing is going to arrive on the earth. It's not telling us about geographical direction. It's telling us something far more important. In other words, it's telling us this city is prepared by God. It's from above. It's saying it's prepared by God. I mean, I don't think there's a more powerful way that you could express the simple truth that the city is built and designed. God is the architect. He's the sanctifying one. He'll be the one that will do the work. He'll make the city all that it is. He'll bring the people together. He will be the builder, the architect, the completer. It's all those truths are expressed in the simple idea it's coming from above. Now, I mean, Tom here knows about architectural engineering work and others. One thing, and I don't know much about architectural work and engineering, etc. And Dutoy, I mean, we saw his houses are being built and all the work going on in that. But one thing I do know is you start from the bottom up. Isn't that true? You generally, when you start building, it's from the bottom up. But this building is differently. It starts from the top down. It's a building coming down from above. And it's saying this is because this is God's work. It's not our work. All these human cities in Rome, in Greece, they all were built from the bottom up. They started up. That's how you build things. And you get to your highest pinnacle, the Tower of Babel, building from the bottom up. But God builds from the top down. And this is telling us about the nature of the work of God. He is the architect, He's the planner, He's the designer behind all these things. And as the book of Hebrews says, the city whose builder and architect is God. And Abraham longed for such a city, not like Babel, but the New Jerusalem is defined and created by God. It's of God and His wisdom and His work in every way. It's a wonderful truth, that, isn't it? If you just meditate on the fact of the geographical descent, it's from God. I often say to people, we need God to do something in our day. We need revival and renewal, and we need the power of God. But we need it from the top down, not from the bottom up. Because too many people try and work things up for God from the bottom up, instead of praying for things to come down. And there's a whole lot in what this is saying about God's work from the top. It's of God, as the Apostle John often writes in his letters. Let's lastly look at the next thing that he sees. He sees it's the New Jerusalem. He sees the New Jerusalem, the holy city. He calls it the New Jerusalem. For the Jewish people, and for the story of the Bible thus far, the story, and particularly the prophets, and yes, also the prophet Isaiah, many of the prophets, all the prophets longed and hoped for was Jerusalem restored, Jerusalem fulfilled, Jerusalem that would be all that it was meant to be, Jerusalem, the city that David founded, that the greater son of David would come and reign in physical Jerusalem in Israel, and there they would, as a nation, flourish. They would have national flourishing, a national governance, a national solidarity amongst their people, national unity. Where was this symbolized for the Jewish people of the Old Testament, and still for some Jewish people today? It's symbolized in Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. That's what the Jewish people and the story of a lot of the Old Testament reveals. And why Jesus, when Jesus did come, where did Jesus do his, well, he came to Jerusalem. Remember, on a donkey. It was a very significant time when the king came to Jerusalem seated on a donkey. We know that he taught in the streets of Jerusalem, that he was rejected by the leaders of Jerusalem, but he died there in Jerusalem, or just outside the walls of Jerusalem. He rose again from the dead just outside of the walls of Jerusalem, and he sent forth his Spirit to his people who were in Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem, the great outreach of the kingdom of God to all the nations where we are today was from almost that mother church, the church of believers in Jerusalem. So this whole centeredness of Jerusalem was in keeping with the Old Testament perspective. And it's there in the Old Testament. But John's words here are of a new Jerusalem. And this is an important word, the New Jerusalem. Because you see, there's the old Jerusalem and then there's the New Jerusalem. So it became an issue in the church that, many people were expecting in the first century. The physical, geographical, the exact, the ways that the prophets had spoken, that all nations would stream to Jerusalem, etc. And that really didn't happen under the Messiah and even under the church. And so people had to rethink and look at, well, what were those promises? Which Jerusalem was it speaking about? Now, what we see here is actually a far greater Jerusalem than the physical, geographical Jerusalem in Israel today. And yes, even in the purposes of God, Jesus is going to complete, I believe, his purposes with physical Jerusalem and Israel. He's going to complete that with his second coming. I've given you all the things about Jerusalem. He taught there, he lived and died and rose again outside Jerusalem. He sent his Spirit in Jerusalem. There's one more event that's waiting, linked to Jerusalem, and that's his second coming. Where's Jesus going to be coming when he comes through the clouds? Where's his destination launching place? Well, the prophet Zechariah chapter 14 indicates that it's to Jerusalem. He's going to stop the annihilation of the Jewish people that seems to be taking place there. So his last great act is also Jerusalem related. But is there a greater Jerusalem? Is this a more transcendent Jerusalem? Because the very limitations, firstly, of the Old Testament prophets were, it sort of was a Jewish place, physical locality quite limited. And for many people, it was also that physical Jerusalem had been problematic. It had actually rejected Jesus. And the same would happen today. If Jesus had to come quietly and start preaching in Jerusalem, he would be crucified. It would be a different way. Because Jerusalem is the bloody city, the prophets also call it. It's become like Sodom and Gomorrah. And so this dark side of Jerusalem gives us the reason for the boundaries and the reason for God actually bringing about a new Jerusalem. Something that the physical Jerusalem was always pointing to. Something far greater. A far greater place, a far greater city When Jesus said to the woman at the well, a time is coming when you'll worship the Father not in Samaria, not in this place in Jerusalem, but you'll worship in a place of the Spirit and in truth. Is some greater place. And here we have the ultimate fulfillment of the place, and that is the New Jerusalem. This is not Jerusalem today just sort of a clean up. This is of a different, greater, superior order to which all the longings of the Jews of today and of the past find their final fulfillment in this New Jerusalem which comes down from heaven. And as we'll see what this is, it's related to the church of the Lord Jesus Christ, where Jew and Gentile can be together now, the perfect society and the new community. So the New Jerusalem is something more transcendent than a geopolitical place on this old earth. Just as much as there is an old earth and a new earth, an old heaven, so there's a New Jerusalem. And this is the city of peace. That's what the word Jerusalem mentions. It's the city of peace. Yerushalayim, linked to Shalom, the city of peace. And we're going to spend a lot of time, this whole 2 chapters nearly, as John from verse 8 starts to look at this New Jerusalem, this bride. It's presented as a bride, as a New Jerusalem. But it is important for you to know we are speaking something of a far greater dimensions and reality than the piece of real estate and the city of David. God is still not finished his prophecies with the Jerusalem geographically on earth today. But that's not the only Jerusalem. That city today points to something far greater. And this is what John is going to reveal to us here. So we shouldn't be, if you've been praying, we've been praying for Jerusalem, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and yes, we need to do that here. But let's remember the New Jerusalem. There are some Christians that they seem to be only focused upon the Jerusalem in Israel today. That's sort of the boundary. But there is a greater Jerusalem, whose city and architect and builder is God. This is the heavenly Jerusalem that Hebrews and Paul in Galatians 4 speaks about. There is a greater city that is going to be the holy city. I once heard or read a Bible teacher explain it like this, and I thought it was very helpful by looking at how the Old Testament prophecies and the New Testament fulfillment on a greater level. He said, well, if I've got a 13-year-old son, and I say to my 13-year-old son, who's or just sort of got his first bicycle or whatever, and you say, well, son, when you turn 21, I'm going to buy you the best bicycle you've ever dreamed of, and it'll be phenomenal, it'll be unlike anything else. And you'll be able to do anything with, go independently on it, etc. And your youngster, maybe he was younger than 13, so longs for the day when he'll turn 21. And then when your 13-year-old now turns 21, and you take him to the garage on his birthday, and you open the door, and there's something with a cloth over it, and you lift up the cloth, and what does he see? He sees a motorbike. What is the son going to do? Well, he's not going to say, Dad, but you said it's a bicycle. You've lied to me. He would say, my son, it's far better. When you were 13 years of age, you couldn't understand what you're going to get when you turn 21. I had to speak to you in your 13-year-old, or in the language of that. But what I have is far bigger. It's like a bike. But wow, it's a far better bike. And it's an important illustration, because what comes in the New Testament is new things from the Old. But it is not exactly like the Old. There's something something greater. And we need to, as Christians particularly, we are embracing a higher order of reality. A new city, a new temple, even a new people of God that is now no longer just Jew. The people, it's Jew and Gentile. There's a new people of God. There's something new and great. And God is bringing those old things and bringing them into glorious fulfillment. So remember that when we think about the glorious reality that is new. All right, I think that's it for our Bible study for this morning. What is the time?
10:37.
10:37. Yes, we are about an hour and 10 minutes. That's what we do. And next week we are going to look at the more detail. The ninth vision is like from a distance. John just sees this holy city come down from a distance. And then in verse 9, what we're going to see in 2 weeks' time is that the angel is going to come to him and says, John, now I'm going to take you on a tour of the city. And he has a close-up encounter with this.
Why 2 weeks?
Because next week we're just finishing the words of God who speaks. We'll look at the words that we haven't. We've just done one verse today. I think. Well, let's thank God for the city of God. I think this is cause for us to be encouraged, to remember that we have a city. And if you know that great hymn, Glorious Things of Thee Are Spoken, Zion City of Our God, by John Newton, the slave trader, became a Christian. And this has always been part of the longing of the people of God. There is a city where we will flourish, where we'll be together, where there'll be provision and protection. God's rule will be there in the presence of God. Everything we need. Everything that people have longed for when they've made cities will ultimately be fulfilled for those who are looking for the city. And I want to ask you, are you looking for the city in your life? Are you hoping in the city? We need to. It is a glorious reality. Let's pray. Father, it is a great vision that you have given to John, that he has recorded, and that we can have as part of our thinking and life, to give us great encouragement and endurance, that although everything is fading away and we will soon pass and be gone, we thank you that for the people of God there remains a city of God. And this is a glorious hope for your people in Jesus Christ. May we set our hearts and minds upon this glorious truth that this city is there and that we are heading towards the city. We thank you for its perfections, its provisions. Thank you that it's what you've prepared. It's come from above. Thank you for your perfect reign of righteousness and your perfect reign of governance. Thank you for the waters and the rivers and the fruit trees that we'll see that grow there in the place of ultimate provision. And thank you that it'll also be a place of human society as you've wanted us to be, to all live together in love and unity, to be one as you and the Father are one. We thank you for the glorious city of God. Make it part of our thinking. Put it in our bloodstreams, that we would be encouraged and we would be full of hope as we go forward. We bless you for your word and the time together today. Thank you. Amen. Well, everybody, yes, and Derek, we pray for you and for God's hand and presence to be with you in your health and the challenges that come with that. And be assured of our remembering you here in Lakeside Chapel. Maybe when you come back, we can have the induction service of the new pastor.
Have you unmuted them?
Yeah. Anyway, if anybody wants to unmute themselves or say anything, you're welcome to do that. But were there any visitors here I think Mr. and Mrs. Dutoy, I got a message seeing if they were here. No. Was that Isabel's parents?
No, I think
No.
it might have been Isabel's mom. I'm not sure.
Isabel? Is that your mom and dad?
No, it
No.
was her dad. It's her dad's funeral.
Oh, Heather's reminding me I did your dad's funeral. Sorry. Come on.
Isn't it Evelyn?
Evelyn
Maybe it's
Dutoy.
Evelyn and
Evelyn.
Yeah.
Okay.
Elna will keep us.
Well, Elna, you
to you.
keep us informed. I'll email the people and just find out if they. So, if there's anybody who wants to join us still, just send me the email and we will join you with that. All right, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy the sunny
Bye,
weather.
everybody.
Bye, Elna.
Keep in fresh air. That's what we need today. Fresh air, sun. Enjoy that. Try and get some of that today. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
So what happened to the new pastor?